if I just start a new line, and I'm going to use that Control// shortcut. So again, if we go to a new chart, that's the one that was mentioned here. So if we do Control and // we get this inline prompt. So let's go with write code to solve FizzBuzz. So if you don't know, this is a common interview question. If I press enter now and let that write the code, then I'm given the option, do I want to accept or discard? So I'm going to accept that by pressing enter. And I actually want this to be in a class. So what I'm going to do is select that whole bit of code. I'm going to do Control and // So I've got this. And notice how it says, ask AI to modify the selected code now because I've selected some code. And let's say wrap this in our class. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to press enter. So that's accepted it. Something doesn't look right there. I'm going to Alt, enter, and move this to its own file. That's better. I think it was because it was in program.cs, a class within top-level statements. So just in case you don't know what FizzBuzz is, it's basically a common interview question where the programmer is expected to write some code which iterates through some numbers. And if the number's divisible by 3, it prints out fizz. If the number's divisible by 5, it prints out buzz. If the number's divisible by both of them, it prints out FizzBuzz. So this looks about right. There's probably things we could do with it. One thing, just from a code style point of view, I prefer to use var. Now I can obviously alt enter and say use var, and I can choose to do that across the whole solution if I wanted. But instead of doing that, if I go to the settings here, so the settings we saw before, the prompt library, so this is where we added joke. We've got this chat instructions, so I can actually say always use var. And then if I say save, and then let's just delete all of this. And we can now see that on the right-hand side, remember how I said I would explain this later on in the video? So this now says always use var. So if I type here, write our class to solve FizzBuzz, this is doing it slightly differently. This is doing in our chat window instead. And it also explains a bit more when you're doing it in the chat window. And you can obviously, one thing with AI is don't just accept the first input. Iterate it and have a conversation and tell it what you want to change. Ask it questions if you don't understand things. But we can see that's honored what I wrote about always using var. So that'll use that for all chats now. So you can imagine that if I do settings, where were we? Project library for chat instructions. So you can imagine writing quite a detailed list here of your coding standards or any standard contextual information that you want the prompt to know about. So for example, controversial I know, but I personally prefer a single line block to not have braces. Again, very controversial, but I prefer that. I could just articulate that here so that I don't have to edit it every time. So this is quite powerful, and you can make this really long. Don't feel it's got to be like one line. It could be paragraphs worth here. So going to here, we can now copy it to the clipboard, paste it where the caret is, or add a new file. So I'm going to just insert the snippet at the caret, and small tweak, there's some suggestions. So I'm going to do alt enter, move it to the right namespace. The file name it created before is slightly different, so I'm going to do alt enter and rename the file to match the file type. Now I want some tests for this, so let's just create a new test project. New project, let's go for unit tests. I always choose XUnit. Let's do AI assistant demo.tests and then enter. So we've got the context here, so let's say write some unit tests. So it's writing me a whole bunch of unit tests. If I scroll right down to the bottom, and then it's explaining them all as well, which we won't read through now. If I get rid of this, and I'll say insert snippet at caret, and that's done that. It's not going to be able to find it because it needs a project reference. So if I do reference, remember we spoke about this in the last section, projects and add, and then we should hopefully have an underline so we can do alt enter and then enter to import the missing references. And that's now compiling. So if we go to the top, A few tidy ups. I'll do Alt Enter here, remove unused directives. There's a suggestion here. That's going to be namespace, so move to the right namespace. Then we're green, so I'm happy. So let's actually run the test and see what happens. If I do this and do run all, and they've all passed. If I now go back to the code, another thing I can do is if I select all of this and then go to the AI actions, and then we can do things like suggest refactoring or explain the code. So there's various different options here. So let's just do that. And without actually going through this thoroughly, we can just see that it's gone through, it's made some suggestions, it's describing why it's made the different suggestions, for example, using constants and that kind of thing. So you can see how this will be really useful. If you write some code and then you've got it working, but you just want to see if there's any improvements that could be made, you can see how just almost pairing with this AI assistant is giving you suggestions and feedback, and then you can ask it questions. You can say, well, if it did this, is this better? And it can give you the pros and cons and that kind of thing. So just having that conversation with this chat window is really powerful. And as I said earlier, where I normally use ChatGPT in a separate window, I'm constantly alt-tabbing to ChatGPT to have that conversation, where here I can just have it staying in my IDE. The last thing I want to show before we wrap up this video is we've spoken about Git and commits. If I let's just select a few things so I can commit, then you can see here, in fact, let's select everything. Then you can see here we've got that squiggly purple icon again, the AI assistant icon, and it says generate commit message with AI assistant. So I've done that, and it's looked at the changes, and it's basically written a nice commit message describing it. Now, if I go back to that settings we saw before, and AI assistant prompt library, then we can see this built-in actions here, commit message generation. So I've not changed this. This is the default one, but you can see how this is giving some information to the AI model of how to generate this commit message. So things like don't be too verbose, start with short sentences, no more than 50 characters, then leave an empty line with a more detailed explanation, which is the recommended format for commit messages. But just being able to explain this in English is so powerful. And obviously you can come in and tweak this to suit your company's requirements. So if I cancel that, you've also got a similar thing for PRs. Now, at the end of the Git video earlier on this course, I demoed this when we created the PR. So I've not got a PR here now, so I won't demo it again. But when you create a PR and it's filling in the title and description, you've got a similar kind of thing where if you've got the AI assistant installed and enabled, then as part of the PR, it'll automatically generate the PR title and description for you in a similar way that it's done for this commit message. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at using GitHub Copilot instead of this, because you might already have a GitHub Copilot license, so you might prefer to use that. There is a plugin to do that, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. So the last video was fairly long, so I'll keep this one fairly short. It's possible that you've already got a GitHub Copilot subscription, and you'd rather use this instead of paying for another subscription. If I scroll down and go to pricing, so this does the same thing as the JetBrains site with having to scroll down to get to this. If I do this, maybe they're using the same template, but looking at the pricing, so this is, again, this might change, but this is also a paid subscription. As far as Ride is concerned, if I switch to this tab, there is a plugin to support this. Now, later on in the course, I'll talk more about plugins, so I'm not going to go through installing it now, but I will switch over to Rider where I already have it installed, and I'll just talk through the user interface quickly. So first of all, there's a few different icons. On the left, there's this one. On the right, we've got these. Yet again, if they're hidden, look in this ... menu. This left one does a bit of an introduction, so it's kind of like a welcome page. And it talks through a few of the different features. We don't need to read this now because I'm going to go through it. So let's close that. Over on the right, we've got a chat window. So this is very similar to what we saw using the AI Assistant plugin. And again, we've got this kind of like ChatGPT kind of interface where you can have a conversation and ask it to write code. We've also got a very similar plus where you can add files to the context. As it mentions here, I can do a / and choose one of these commands. So like explain, feedback, fix, and that kind of thing, or document a selection. So to demo this, let's just delete this class, and let's get rid of the tests as well. So one option is that I can start typing some code and it will try and complete it for me based on what I've started typing. And in this window here, it'll start doing suggestions and you can choose which suggestion you prefer. Another option is you can start writing a comment. So you can do a comment and say, implement a class that solves FizzBuzz. And literally me typing enter there has done this, and I can press tab to accept, which I'll do. Another small bit of the UI, which I didn't mention before, is down at the bottom, there's this GitHub Copilot icon. If I click on it, we've got a few options. So we can log out, it says the status. We can also disable completions, which is what we've just seen then. And there's settings. So there's various settings here as well. Another thing there is, if you press Alt-Enter, so I mentioned in the last section, we've got this AI actions for the AI assistant stuff. There's also, with this plugin installed, you've got the open GitHub Copilot inline chat. So the Alt-Enter, this is there, you can do that. And then you get a similar kind of experience where you can start typing inline as well. So as you can see, this and AI assistant is very similar. I'm certainly not going to say which one you should be using, but I'm assuming you don't want to pay for both subscriptions, so I wanted to cover them both. So that now marks the end of this module. In the next module, we're going to be looking at performance investigations and CPU and memory profiling.